and I'm particularly gratified to see some people I don't know this evening. And I want to thank you, Dominion, for hosting this event. Today I'm going to make a presentation called Moses Sings, Isaiah Speaks, and Other Matters. It's in 3 parts, but it's one piece. So I'll tell you what's in. I'm going to slightly pause between the 3 parts, and then afterwards, which will take, the whole thing will take about 20 minutes, and I'll entertain questions or comments or silence. So first I'll talk about dissonance and hope, reading from Monotheism in Word and Music, an essay in poetry, history, music, art, occasioned by the Metropolitan Opera premiere of Arnold Schoenberg's Moses and Aaron. Part 2 is brief. The verses, Isaiah 55, 6 through 11, appear in my new translation of the prophet's Haftarah for Shabbat Chazon, the Sabbath of Vision, which marks the destruction of both the first and second temples, and is also the day Moses' spies returned from Canaan. Part 3 tells a story about the opening chapter of Deuteronomy in the Hebrew Bible, Devarim, called These the Words in After Adam, the books of Moses. And as I said before, I'll read straight through, and I've been instructed to take a deep breath before I begin. Arnold Schoenberg had a superstitious horror of the number 13. He was born on September 13th, 1874, the day after Rosh Hashanah. A Viennese Jew raised as a Catholic, he converted to Lutheranism in his 20s before returning to Judaism in 1933. Schoenberg's opera, Moses and Aaron, based on passages in the books of Exodus and Numbers, was composed using the 12-tone method he invented. He spelled Aaron with 1 A, so his opera's title wouldn't have 13 letters. Though the plot summary provided by the Metropolitan Opera for its production locates Act 1 of Moses and Aaron in the 13th century BC. Few lives in art were more dogged by contradiction and controversy than Arnold Schoenberg's. Recognized as a genius from an early age, he could have fashioned success in the manner of Strauss, or he could have assumed the legacy of Gustav Mahler, composing huge orchestral and choral works, as he did with the epic folk song cycle Wieder. Schoenberg even composed naughty songs for the turn of the century Viennese cabaret. But with more and more insistence, the dissonance repressed inside the conventional language of music was clamoring for release from those harmonic rules that required music to end in the key in which it had begun. Harmony signals resolution, a neatness in the packaging, a packed solution that could no longer claim to be more than a fiction. And that became intolerable to Schoenberg, who regarded music as a vehicle for truth and himself as its reluctant emancipator. To say that Schoenberg was a Moses, emancipating dissonance and leading music toward a land he would not enter, might be neat, but it doesn't answer why Moses and Aaron, written explicitly as an invitation to think, is such powerful music theater against commercial pieties and all the other odds. Schoenberg wrote the libretto of his 1932 biblical opera in 3 acts, but he only set the first 2 acts to music. In the following years, as prospects for its performance evaporated, the composer suggested that Act 3 might be omitted or merely read aloud. Or, should resources preclude a full production, Schoenberg wryly suggested that the dance around the golden calf in Act 2 might be performed as a standalone piece. In any case, the prophet of serial composition and model for the protagonist of Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus died on Friday, July 13th, 1951, having never witnessed the staging of his masterpiece. Monday, February 8th, 1999, after more than 40 years of wandering, Moses and Aaron entered the Promised Land, a premier production at the Metropolitan Opera at Lincoln Center. It opened to a full house. No one left before the first act. And most of the audience stayed for the second. This was itself a wonder, since the New York public customarily walks out of a concert hall at the first strange sound, the exodus to dissonance. The orchestra played Schoenberg's score as music, rather than as a lecture or demonstration. The huge chorus sustained the music and provided a context for the action. Moses, sung by British basso John Tomlinson, had a real beard. The spare, expressive stage set used only blue and orange-red to relieve its black and white, a few shapes, wedge, wave, and bowl, to suggest Mount Horeb, the desert, the sky, Egypt, and Sinai. Costumes were modern street dress, black and white suits and dresses, shoes, plus some hats and furs and watches and jewels. In the tradition of Bertolt Brecht's Berlin theater, each scene was identified by a caption printed on a piece of scenery. Act 2 takes place in Moses' absence. After an orchestral interlude, Schoenberg's libretto calls for the overthrow of the elders of Israel, the exaltation of the golden calf on the altar, the sacrifice of herds of animals, followed by a dance of the ritual slaughterers, a faith healing, suicides, renunciation, murder, orgies of drunkenness and dancing, the sacrifice of 4 naked virgins, then a general stripping to shouted slogans praising creative power, fertility, and desire. The Met production took some liberties with the libretto. First, it updated the dancing. The herds are gone. Butchers and leaders of the tribes of Israel and their followers became fashion models and bulb-popping photographers, businessmen and politicians, gangsters and teenagers chewing gum. The people who followed their prophet into the wilderness in Act 1 dressed like any prosperous crowd of Upper West Side Manhattanites. I found myself remembering the musical toughs in West Side Story instead of hanging on the action. As the flashbulbs popped and cash was spread around, I wondered when they'd get to the naked virgins already, and would the Metropolitan Opera pull its punches. Schoenberg, in a performance footnote, demanded nakedness insofar as the law and the needs of the stage permit and demand. The Met's virgins did peel down to their undies, as did all the other naked people called for in the stage directions. I'm not sure whose rules and needs were being heeded. No New York audience would have been shocked by total nudity, and maybe if naked had meant naked, the New Yorkers might have actually felt rebuked by Moses' descent from the mountain. Act 2 has much in common with cabaret or a music hall. Besides the strippers and naked dancers, it features stand-up comedians, tellers of quiet jokes. The renouncers and sacrificers give away what they don't have or don't need or don't want. In sacrifice to an inanimate object that can't use it anyway. The virgins give their passion. Old people sacrifice the remainder of their lives. The poor donate their sad rags to the gods of self. Schoenberg's figurative witticisms are like the jokes and Freud's wit and its relation to the unconscious. Examples of behavior, pointed demonstrations, or mild provocations to something other than laughter. In a peculiar variation on a song and patter routine invented by this production, the compromised elders of Israel dropped their trousers and put shoes on their hands so that they appeared to dance upside down, the old soft shoe. More than the elders got stood on their heads. It would be reasonable to expect that song and dance, orgy and riot, bloodshed and spectacle would be more of a show than Act 1's anguished and self-consuming philosophical and theological dialogue of two brothers. But they aren't. Schoenberg's representation of theology in word and music beggars everything else in the opera. In Moses and Aaron, thought carries the day. High art and religion make livelier theater than do the staples of entertainment. On this stage, virtue plays better than sin. Dissonance, for Schoenberg, meant more than music theory. It referred as well to the moral uncertainty that accompanies the discovery that the world is not adequately described in terms of the self. It is Moses' recognition that the land of milk and honey doesn't exist except as a promise, and Aaron's problem that when Israel hears the promise, they want it fulfilled. Made to wait, they seek refuge in the gods they know, gods like themselves. It is the uncomfortable intuition that people may choose freedom, but they desire bondage. Dissonance is embedded in the materials of language and art, because neither language nor art penetrates to reality, the thing in itself. Dissonance, in Schoenberg's hands, invokes a belief in meaning beyond the self, at the same time acknowledging it's just the self that knows. Opera isn't usually an arena for hard thinking. It is typically loved for grand passions realized in gorgeous fantasy, for impossibilities enacted in libretto land. It is multimedia fairy tale music videos for grown-ups. Moses and Aaron offers a different kind of adult entertainment. It refutes the assertion that there's no such thing as art, that no thought is higher than another. One clear voice can carry over a chorus, and an evening of opera can stay in the head as something other than a melody and masquerade. Schoenberg uses the imaginative freedom granted by the operatic suspension of disbelief, if not to justify, then at least to engage God's ways to man. His is the drama of monotheism, the song of the limited self in an infinite universe, of freedom and awe, bondage and security, the dance of the young who would be old, and the old who would be young. Seek God when he is found. Call him while he is near. Let the bad one leave his way, the empty one his plots, and turn to the Lord who pities him. Our God does much to pardon. For my plans are not your plots, nor your ways my ways, the one declares. As the sky above the earth, so my ways above your ways, my thoughts beyond your means. Like the rain or the snow that falls from the sky does not just return, but first waters the earth, makes it yield and sprout, and gives seed to the sower and bread to the eater. So is my word that comes out from my mouth. It does not return to me empty, but does what I desire and nurtures what I sow. There's a gap in the biblical chronology between the last verse of Deuteronomy 1 and the first verse of the following chapter. From the 9th of Av, in the second year of Israel's departure from Egypt, until the 40th year when God told Moses, "You have circled this mountain long enough," Moses wrote nothing. On that 9th of Av, the spies returned from Canaan with a fearful report. Israel believed the spies and doubted the promised land was good. The angry one then decreed that, except for Joshua and Caleb, not one man of that generation would live to see the land flowing with milk and honey. Only the children would inherit. For Israel, the sentence meant aimless wandering. For Moses, God's anger is more personal. The lawgiver would not enter the land. Also, during those lost years, God kept silent. What did Moses do with the silence? One legend tells that on the eve of the 9th of Av, every year for 38 years, Moses sent a herald throughout the camp who proclaimed, "Go out, dig your grave. Go out, dig your grave. The people went out. Each dug a grave, lay down in it, and spent the night. Next morning, the herald cried, "Let the living leave the dead." The living stood up. Each morning on the 9th of Av, 15,000 rose no more. And so it went, year after year. In the last year of their wanderings, the children of Israel dug graves and spent the night. Next morning, all arose. None had died. That same day, when all the generation were consumed and dead, God broke silence and spoke again to Moses. First, the Holy One issued marching orders for Israel's conquest of the lands and peoples east of Jordan. Then, he removed Moses from the leadership of Israel and bestowed it upon Joshua. And here, the Torah portion stops. The Sabbath preceding the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, is called the Sabbath of Vision, after Isaiah's vision of the destruction of the temple and the sack of Jerusalem. Isaiah testifies by sound, not sight. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken. His call echoes the opening of the Song of Moses. Give ear, O ye heavens, and I will speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. Where Moses' testimony is direct, the words of a man who, even when his prayer is denied, is heard, Isaiah's words are of the one removed, transmitted from afar. In an opportune moment, William Blake asked Isaiah how he could be certain that the voice he heard was God's. The prophet answered the poet, "I saw no God, nor heard any, in a finite, organical perception, but my senses discovered the infinite in everything. And as I was then persuaded and remained confirmed that the voice of honest indignation is the voice of God, I cared not for consequences, but wrote." The first temple was destroyed because of three evils in it: idolatry, immorality, and bloodshed. When it fell, prophecy ceased. In the prophetic silence, some read history for signs. The second temple also fell on the 9th of Av, even though people studied Torah, observed the commandments, and practiced charity. Why? A later generation holds that while the second temple stood, hatred without rightful cause prevailed. Hatred without rightful cause is as grave as the sins of idolatry, immorality, and bloodshed combined. By Hadrian's imperial decree, Jerusalem was plowed under on Tisha B'Av 130 of the Common Era. There is no temple now. There is Jerusalem. There is still hatred without rightful cause. Who doesn't deem his hatred rightful? And there's silence. Beside the countless blessings, the one showered on Israel, recorded by Moses, the prophet and teacher and lawgiver bestowed 4 of his own. 2 of these blessings are found in Deuteronomy. The first, "The Lord, God of your fathers, make you 1,000 so many more as you are now, and bless you." And the fourth, "And this, the blessing wherewith Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death." The second blessing appears in Leviticus, when Moses and Aaron come out from the tent of meeting and bless the people. After the people finished constructing the sanctuary in Exodus, Moses blessed Israel a 3rd time, saying, "May the presence rest upon the work of your hands." And, the man continued, in the words of the psalm he composed, "Lord, where we have always lived before the earth and sky were born, you made us children of destruction and asked us to return again. Return, although an eye blinks and 1,000 years pass, though the night watch hours crawl to eternity. Days crest past on the sweeping flood, sleep to the sleepless. No sooner grown than mown grass, clippings blown across the walk. Your anger, wind, time swallows up our secrets, whistles through our faults. Our faces masks worn in a tale 70 or 80 years, that's for the lucky, told in work and tears. How strong's the wind? More than we fear. So teach us how to weigh a day, to wear the burden of a heart, because we do not know how long before we must return, Lord. Damp the dust with small rain, shade the strong sun behind towered clouds, sometimes, so that our children know a dappled place, much like our fathers had, but happy, not the evil we have learned to handle, greedy factories of hate, and let some part of what we've made last touch upon you, that part a heart or hand has made. Thank you. Questions? Comments? Answers? Would you like? I can read another little essay. Yeah. Okay. This one is touching the present. As a darshan, that is interpreter, an occasional maftir or last reader in our lay-led traditional egalitarian Sabbath services here in Charlottesville, Virginia, I'm often struck by the immediacy of the Torah and Haftorah texts. Sometimes Moses and the prophets ascend from the mundane to the eternal. Other times, their words reach down and touch the present. Like Sabbath celebrants around the world on August 12, 2017, the morning minyan at Congregation Beth Israel in Charlottesville read aloud in Hebrew from Deuteronomy 7:12 to 11:25, the Torah portion Akev, or because. Unlike our fellow countrymen, we chanted, "How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob," at an uncomfortable intersection of American politics and the history of our people. Stonewall Jackson's statue stands 1 block east of our synagogue on Jefferson Street at 4th Street Northeast, near the courthouse. Not long ago, the courthouse park benches afforded an uncrowded spot to take a bag lunch, sunny in winter, shade in summer. Robert E. Lee, a stride traveler, occupies the top of a grassy knoll 2 blocks west of the synagogue, across 2nd Street from the Historical Society and the public library built on the original site of Beth Israel. This park, between Jefferson and Market Streets, with its easy access to the downtown mall, has served as a campground for the homeless and a place to play chess or music. Its prime location has also featured such events as a chocolate expo and the annual Festival of Cultures. That Saturday, services began an hour early, so we might worship and depart the synagogue before scheduled demonstrations began at noon in the 2 parks with statues of men on horseback. The congregation climbed the stairs of the main sanctuary on Jefferson Street, past a security line to enter through the only unlocked door. During prayers, we heard the thump of helicopter rotors, crowds shouting, and from the windows outside the sanctuary, I watched groups of armed, uniformed neo-Nazis file down the 3rd Street sidewalk. In Akev, Moses asked Israel, "What does the Lord your God require of you?" In his Kuzari, an argument for the faith of Israel, the Andalusian exile Hebrew poet Judah Halevi answered that rational law, which demands justice, good actions, and recognizes God's bounty, rules every community. The Torah is corollary to rational law. Without Israel's knowing how, the presence descended and God's fire consumed their offerings. Israel heard God speak, heard the story of their becoming a people. All matters which reason would refuse unless affirmed by observance. Is it enough, Halevi asked, for Jews to practice doing justice and love mercy? Can they neglect circumcision, Sabbath, and other laws and still feel happy? Following the Torah portion, and before the scroll is returned to the ark, we heard Isaiah 49:14 to 51:3, a Haftorah of consolation. This day, although the blessings were chanted in Hebrew, the selection was read in English. After services, we gathered in the hall adjacent to the main sanctuary to sing the customary verses instructing Israel to keep the Sabbath. Prayers were spoken over wine and bread, and the rabbi announced that the Torahs had been removed to a safe place. The congregation left the House of Learning in small groups. With my wife and two friends, we walked along 4th Street back to the car. Our view of Stonewall Jackson was obscured by the crowd. Some wore message T-shirts, some wore camouflage. One was dressed as Captain America. Many carried weapons. As we waited at the red light, a pickup truck with rolled-up tinted windows honked several times. Hard to tell who belonged to whom. Driving home on 9th Street, I saw 6 men and 1 woman get out of a white van. Dressed in black body armor and Darth Vader helmets, they unloaded assault rifles, batons, and shields from the back of their van. All wore sidearms. While I in the back seat recalled anti-war marches from the 1960s, from behind the wheel, Sam, the frequent shock victims and worship leader, talked about his days as a police cadet in Colorado 30 years ago. I was angry and afraid. None of us wanted to pick up a gun. How then to speak about the unspeakable, incredible language when reason refuses and politics fails? A pointed question in the little city of Thomas Jefferson, the slaveholder author of the Declaration of Independence, whose Monticello was purchased by Commodore Uriah Levy and restored by his nephew, New York Jewish Congressman Jefferson Monroe Levy. At the end of his consolation in the Haftorah, Isaiah offers first this: Look, all you who kindle fire, who wield torches, depart from the flames of your fire, by the flares you ignited. By my hand, this for you, where you lie down is terror. And because the Haftorah must conclude with a blessing, the prophet closes with this instruction: Hear me, you who pursue justice, who seek the Lord. Look to the rock you were hewn from, the pit where you were quarried. Look to Abraham your father, and to Sarah who bore you. Only one, when I called him, I blessed him and made him many. For the Lord comforts Zion, comforts all her desolations. He will make her wilderness like Eden, her desert like the Lord's garden. Joy and pleasure are found in her, thanksgiving and the voice of song. Question. Great.
Can I take you back to Schoenberg's dissonance?
Sure, please.
As opposed to more recent
Dissonance.
Do you find any analogy with Schoenberg's attitude about dissonance, wanting to break free of that rigid structure? Do you find any of that in the Torah texts of Moses' song or Isaiah's prophecy? Do you find because I find when I read those in Hebrew, that's like listening to Mozart to me. I can't imagine applying Schoenberg's aesthetics to that text. I wonder.
Well, I think that when you say for Mozart's lyrics are not, I think of Don Giovanni. They're what he sings is not ambiguous. Whereas in the Torah, there are as as many interpretations as there are readers. So although for you or for me, I may hear classical trope, let's call it that, because it wouldn't really be Mozart. For someone else, there's perhaps there's a place where Moses is up on the mountain, and Joshua comes up and says, "There's a noise in the camp. There's a noise in the camp," and Moses comes up, "Better get back there." I don't know what's like. What is that shouting? And there's a discussion about whether this noise is shouting or is it singing. So, and I believe the decision is on the singing side. They're dancing around the golden calf, as in Schoenberg. So, I would say that the interesting thing to me about the Torah is not that it's one thing, but that it's many things, and that it's not even an exemplum. It's a map, and to me, in any case, it's a map of what it means to be human, which is often not a flattering thing.
I wondered if you might want to explain the title, Isaiah's Closing Arguments.
Oh, sure. That little. So hold it up. I was instructed to do these same things. The picture on the cover is actually by a 16th century, 15th century Venetian painter. And Isaiah, this one looks kind of like a Swami. But the reason I close Isaiah's Closing Arguments is because the book contains all the haftorot, which are the haftorahs, the passages from the prophets that are used after the Torah reading, and they are, as it were, the service's farewell to the Torah scroll, which is then returned to the ark. So I call them closing arguments because we've heard from Moses, and now we hear from Isaiah.
So there is always a theme connecting?
Well, sometimes it's not so easy to tell, and sometimes it's a little dissonant. And in fact, when Dante says the poem has to leap over the connections, and we as readers and auditors also have to leap over the connections. When something is read aloud, it's easier to do because you don't stop and scratch your head and say, "What did he mean by that?" But is that sufficient?
You may have answered my question, but I'll ask it anyway. In Isaiah's response to Burke, my first thought was, which Isaiah is unconcerned with consequences? But then in your last reading, maybe it is second Isaiah who is unconcerned first Isaiah.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because for me, there is no first, second, and third Isaiah. Okay. Just as there is, in fact, no Elohist and Yahwist. Okay. Those are ways of refracting and handling a scholarly discomfort with the text. Whereas I would say, yes, the discomfort is supposed to be there, and if you feel comfortable, then you're perhaps kidding yourself.
In that case, if I might follow up,
sure.
In that case, isn't what you read at the end of the last story concerned with consequences?
Sure.
And desires for the map to come to the desired end.
Right. Well, I think one way of thinking about the world to come or the promise is that we are capable of imagining some other kind of life than the one we have and the one we live. And sometimes that need is more pressing than other times. Sure.
I've noticed that you much prefer Isaiah's voice to those of the other prophets and are partial to his haftarot over many of the others. Why?
Well, in part because the others are less ambiguous. Let's put it that way. They either there's a kind of berating or a thumping quality, whereas Isaiah he's up there in the clouds somewhere, and the other prophet I actually respond to is Ezekiel, but he's a prophet of seeing, not of hearing. He talks about what he sees. It's not what he hears. That it? All right. Thank you. Thank you for coming. First one to do this and this and this are on a table somewhere back there.
Right here.
And of course I will sign. I even brought a pen.